Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237, and coming at you with a really random and unexpected review. I was actually at Walmart earlier today getting Corona stuff, and just happened to look through the cheapo bin, and I saw this, and I got curious. And I remember when this came out, and I had an idea of what it was, and avoided it like the plague, but was actually very surprised and impressed with, and that is 2015's Victor Frankenstein. Now, this was before I'd really known about the whole new Dark Universe remakes. Well, not really, but it was before Tom Cruise's The Mummy came out, but I thought this was part of it. And since Daniel Radcliffe was playing Igor, I thought this was going to be like a pretty Twilight version of it. This was also back when my drinking was quite bad, so I just avoided it completely. But I have heard some good things. Now, granted, yeah, it has a 26% on Rotten Tomatoes. But some people on YouTube, who I like and respect their opinion of, was actually quite impressed by it. You know, Brad Jones and company from Stone Gremlins, James Rolfe, the Angry Video Game Nerd. They were quite impressed by this. And so for $5, I thought, yeah, I'll check it out. I mean, I really, really like James McAvoy anyway. I mean, I don't like to talk about Split because the ending to that movie pissed me off like no other movie, and yeah, that's a very depressing subject. But so yeah, this is not part of the Dark Universe remakes, but it is a modern, different retelling of Mary Shelley's classic story, told through the eyes of Igor. And they do a lot of really different, really cool things. It actually feels kind of like a Hammer film. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of CGI. It is a bit more of an action film at times, like a lot of Universal monster films remakes are nowadays. It felt more like a Hammer film than recent Hammer films. Like, was it Lady in the Water or Woman in Black? That was a Hammer film. Either way, both films sucked. Let Me In, which was okay, but yeah, this felt more like a Hammer film. And it was actually written by Max Landis, whose father is John Landis, a director I greatly enjoy and respect. Blues Brothers, Animal House, Kentucky Fried Movie, but known in the horror community for American Werewolf in London. And it sort of feels like he's taken a little bit of every popular version of Frankenstein and put it in here. And I mean, this movie has a lot of, also has a lot of humor. It has kind of like a John Landis sense of humor. A very dry British wit to it. You get great performances by James McAvoy and Daniel Radcliffe, which I'll admit, I've never seen in anything outside Harry Potter before this. And I haven't even seen all the Harry Potter films. But, it does do a wonderful job with its Victorian setting and atmosphere. I do like all the performances, even though James McAvoy is hamming it up sometimes. He is, chewing up a lot of scenery. I still think he does a great job. And they do a lot of different stuff with it. It opens up, Daniel Radcliffe is just the hunchback at the circus. But he shows a strong interest and knowledge for medical science. And one night, this trapeze artist, played by Jessica Brown Finlay, she falls from a very, high up. She breaks her collarbone. And this movie does cool stuff where when it's supposed to show the anatomy, it looks like 1800s drawings like put over it in place of x-rays. I thought that was a very nice touch. And so James McAvoy goes to help, and Daniel Radcliffe asks for his pocket watch to put in place and says, well, if we do this, it will act this way. So, he shows a different understanding for anatomy that Victor Frankenstein himself doesn't really think of. So he sees promise, and he pretty much kidnaps / helps escape Igor. And why it's so different is because we find out that Igor is not really a true hunchback. Just for 18 years, he's had this very large abscess on his back, and it's tweaked his entire body structure and made him walk the way he does. So James McAvoy stabs this giant syringe pump into him. He even siphons out the pus and has to spit it out. Drains all of it. This is the kind of humor. He even walks over to the window and he's just like, "There we are." After he chucks it, we hear screaming out in the streets. Humor like that, which I do find funny. Slaps his back brace on him, and now Igor is walking up straight. And he doesn't have, a Quasimodo face. And he goes to shave and bathe and fix his hair, and he looks normal. So they did something different with Igor that I thought, it was a way that made sense. Having his hunchback be an abscess and having to reconfigure his back, which, yeah, he does tackle him and crack the fuck out of his back. But, so yeah, Victor Frankenstein, he's very eccentric, he's very brilliantly intelligent, but he has these other theories about life. And, even the medical school he's at, he feels he's superior than even the professors. And he's doing all these experiments of starting off with bringing life to certain tissues first. Like this one thing is just these 2 eyes that he has in this apparatus that when he gets it charged up, it puts a match up to the glass, the eyes will twitch. Which, of course, Igor, he says, Igor Straussman, is that what it was, Straussman? Which I don't even think Igor's ever had a last name before, it could be wrong. It's been years since I read Frankenstein. I read that probably 16 years ago. Yeah, Straussman. Says, if you do something different with the nerves, then the eyes will move more in sync. So he starts giving Igor, as I was explaining, he said Igor was his previous flatmate, but he's never around, so he just gives him that name. So he always retreats down to the basement to do his bigger experiment, but he gives Igor, a heart, lungs, different tissues and body parts to bring life to first. And then we find out, and then of course we have these inspectors play one. I don't remember the name of, but Inspector Turpin is played by Andrew Scott, who I thought kind of looked like a cross between Mark Ruffalo and Giovanni Ribisi. But in the escape of the circus, because everyone in the circus is trying to kill him, to stop him, one ends up killing this other guy. So he's kind of chasing the hunchback and the guy that helped him escape or kidnap him. But he's also looking into this other murder that we find out about later. He sees that someone has been harvesting or stealing animal parts from the zoo. And because his bigger experiment is he's pretty much doing his Frankenstein experiment with a chimp, which is very CGI, but probably not even great CGI for 2015. But I forgive it because there's things that they do with it that I enjoy, that I thought was well done. Like first they kind of charge it and we kind of see it breathe, move its head a little. Then he does this presentation for 7 people. The first time they shock it, some flies come out of its chest cavities because it's rotting meat essentially. Then they go full bore and it kind of looks like Koba from Dawn of the Planet of the Apes because he's all fucked up. And I forgive this if it's entertaining and there's some things, some nuances and some things that are done well with it. I forgive the CGI. But of course, the inspector's getting closer and closer, and Victor, we find out, is just more obsessed with creating life for whatever reason. It shows, like, he's talking to the inspector, who is this very devout religious man, very much believes in God. And Frankenstein is a very scientific, rational person. So he sees, he even kind of starts seeing himself as a god type of figure. Which even later on, when the inspector's like, this is not God, this is the creation of Satan himself. He's like, there's no God or Satan, there's only me. Which I thought that was kind of a cool line. Frankenstein's father shows up and berates him as a fool. Pocket watch he always holds dearly. We find out it says Henry Frankenstein, which Henry is in the original story by Mary Shelley. Victor Frankenstein has a friend named Henry. In the Universal film with Colin Clive and Boris Karloff, for whatever reason, it's Henry Frankenstein and his friend is Victor. Why? I don't know. And we find out Henry was his brother. But I think it was a nod to the original Frankenstein films. Because again, it's an amalgamation of just different Frankenstein films. I mean, there's even young Frankenstein references in here. Like, with the inspector, he's like, tells him to tread carefully or watch what he says or listen carefully. And he says, Frankenstein. And he goes, Frankenstein. So it's backwards, but it's obviously a nod to Young Frankenstein. Or even at the dinner party when he's talking about conceiving babies outside of the womb, and he's talking to the trapeze artist lady a floor above, and he looks down and he's frantically talking about his experiment. Then he walks off, and then out of nowhere he just pops up and he's like, what are you talking about? And Igor's just like Victor, how'd you get up here so? And then they have the conversation, kind of like just how Igor or Igor from Young Frankenstein just keeps popping up. A little bit of everything. And even the monster himself, which they don't even call him the monster or the creature, they call him Prometheus. And there's even a line where he says, the modern Prometheus, which is a line from Mary Shelley's novel. It's kind of a mix of, there's some Karloff in him, but he's also, this larger-than-life brute that is kind of more reminiscent of, like, David Prowse from Hammer's Horror of Frankenstein, which is a comedic retelling. It's not just a Hammer sequel. And I like how it's just a bunch of different versions put together for this one, more so original version. But it's still very much, based on Mary Shelley, or inspired by Mary Shelley in her story. There's this other guy, this colleague named Finnegan, who's played by Freddie Fox, who's this, blonde, all-white, rich boy. He wants to have Igor killed, and then he's going to kill Frankenstein when he proves his experiment is real, steal his idea and the technology, and become famous for what Frankenstein wants. And he looked like a blonde Cameron Monaghan from Gotham. And, the whole end is Igor, because he tries to leave him, saying, this isn't right, this isn't life. He finds out that the real Igor is still alive, and some of his parts are being harvested. That was a murder that the inspector's also looking into. That's when Finnegan wants to have him killed. I know I do this all the time, whether it be a rant or a movie I really like, but I know I'm giving this whole thing away. I should have said spoilers, so forgive me, but I was quite impressed with this. For being this really modern CGI film, which the monster is practical, but there's plenty of CGI. Yeah, it's got some action scenes. And yeah, on face value, it does look like they're going for a more pretty Twilight version, because Daniel Radcliffe is an upright walking Igor. But the performances are very fun, well done, and entertaining. Yeah, it's not a straightforward Frankenstein adaptation. It's still a retelling of the story. Like, you could put this alongside Universal's Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein as a double feature. Probably the best. Horror of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein with Kenneth Branagh and Robert De Niro. It's another retelling, Like, I am going to put this in my adaptations playlist, but it's more of a cocktail of things we've seen before, but done well for a very original take. So that's why I was very impressed with this, but I'm going to say spoilers for the rest. But before I get spoilers, the look of the monster, I have to say, is fucking badass looking. But, yeah, spoilers. So, Igor goes out to this castle where Finnegan has taken Victor to do the experiment. He's got a big crew of guys with him. Find out Henry and Victor, when they were younger, they went out into the cold, and Henry, the older brother, was protecting Victor, and he ended up losing his life. So we think Victor is trying to create life to sort of, he took a life, so now he has to replace it. Or the way Igor says it is, you want to pretty much bring on immortality so no one has to feel your loss. And that's when McAvoy gets really chewy on the scenery, and he's just like, no, I've taken a life, so now I must create life. And the way the experiment is done, it's sort of like everything else we've seen. It looks more like the Kenneth Branagh one without the eels. But it's outside in the storm. There's even the big balloons with the conducting rods or apparatuses. And like I said before, the monster, which of course he was cast as the monster, Universal. He was cast as the creature and Hammer. I'm not sure what he was cast as in Mary Shelley's, but with this he was cast as, and it's called the Prometheus, or just Prometheus, which I really like that. It's a nod to, the source material. Played by Spencer Wilding and Guillaume Delaunay. Hope I pronounced that right. Not sure what two guys did what. I think one was the body, the other one was the voice. Could be wrong on that. Which we find out before when they're talking about putting the body together. Because of the amount of power from the electricity, they need a bigger body to sustain it all. That kind of power. In order to do that, they need 2 hearts to pump all that blood, 2 sets of lungs so it can breathe. There's even a part during that montage when they're talking about everything it needs. Frankenstein is even like, and a flat head. Igor's like, why a flat head? And he's like, because I like it, that's why. So, I guess that's their way of saying, well, Karloff is a flat top. And it's classic, so let's do it. And he does. He has the flat top. He has, the stitching and staples, like in Bride of Frankenstein, but more so like Horror of Frankenstein with David Prowse. He's even got bolts in his neck, but it still looks kind of different than Karloff. But really, shirtless, really huge, like refrigerator bodybuilder looking dude. Bald. So that's why I think it's more reminiscent of like the David Prowse Horror of Frankenstein version. And, I do like that scene where he comes up close to him and he's like, I'm your brother. You are life. But then he just goes lifeless. He's just like, you are not life. The inspector shoots him. And then that's when he goes on his rampage. And Victor realizes, like every other version of the story, he's created an abomination. It's not right. And they have to find a way to stop it. Him and Igor do. Frankenstein flees. But he leaves him a letter saying, our experiments are done, but maybe one day I will call upon you for your assistance again. I have figured out what might have gone wrong, but it shows him out in the countryside drawing sketches and plans where he has a picture of a brain with arrows going into the head. So either he didn't put a brain in, or he needed a more normal brain. Which, of course, most of the Hammer series had to deal with finding the right kind of brain. So I liked that. So it kind of set itself up for a sequel, but I don't think it was ever intended to have a sequel. This movie did not do well. I don't think it made much money. Yeah, $34.2 million on a $40 budget, so it was a bomb or a flop. Yeah, critics did not like it. They thought it was pretty much just treading old ground, cheesy. Seemingly no one really liked it, but fans of Frankenstein really seemed to like it. Like myself, I was actually very impressed with it. And while not a straightforward adaptation, instead of just a modern retelling of any Frankenstein film that does that, I thought this was one of the better ones that I've seen, because I've seen a bunch. Many I don't even remember, and I'd see again, but I've seen some really bad ones. But is it Universal, James Whale and Karloff? No. Is it Curse of Frankenstein? No. Hammer. Is it Kenneth Branagh, Robert De Niro, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein? No. Nor is it even as fun as Horror of Frankenstein, but it's still better than a slew of other ones that I've seen, which just have the name Frankenstein somehow in there. But I was very impressed. I like the mixture of all the classic things we've seen before. I like the original stuff that it does, like with Igor and making him more normal. Love the performances, even when James McAvoy's hamming it up. He's a joy to watch. Love what they did with the Victorian costumes and setting and atmosphere and just the entire aesthetic. And I thought the experiment and final design of the monster, or the Prometheus, was well done and pretty badass looking. Probably the most badass design I've seen of the monster. I also didn't mention, is it as good as Young Frankenstein? Well, that's one of my favorite comedies of all time, so no. But it was not nearly as bad as like A Dark Universe, Tom Cruise, The Mummy, or 2010's Wolfman that I was expecting. But yeah, very impressed. And I do recommend it. It might not be for everyone, but for fans of just the name Frankenstein, and not just random sequels or random films, but retellings and adaptations, I think you'll be surprised by this. I really do. I really liked it. Yeah, that is Victor Frankenstein, and thank you for watching.